There's a version of every killer that existed before any of it happened. A child, a teenager, someone who was shaped by things they had no control over into something the people around them couldn't see coming. Whether that excuses anything is a question this channel won't answer for you, but it's a question worth sitting with. Let's get into it.
The summer heat pressed down on Gainesville like a fever, thick, clinging, and relentless. It was the kind of heat that made the nights worse than the days, that made people crack their windows for just the smallest gasp of breeze. But that breeze would carry something in with it, something worse than the heat. It would carry him. He crouched in the shadows near the edge of the woods, unmoving, eyes catching the shimmer of porch lights and moonlight. He watched the apartment complexes like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. Laughter floated through half-open dorm windows. Music thumped softly. Posters were still fresh on the walls. Boxes half unpacked. College kids beginning a new life. They were young. They were excited. They were safe. Or so they thought. He wasn't there to watch. He was there to destroy. Danny Harold Rolling was born in Shreveport, Louisiana, in 1954. From the moment he entered the world, it was clear he was unwanted. His father, James, was a local police officer, a man who believed in control, order, and violence. He made it very clear to Danny's mother, Claudia, that children were not part of the plan. When Danny arrived anyway, James treated him less like a son and more like a mistake. James Rolling's presence in the house was suffocating. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he didn't gamble, but he controlled with precision. He used his authority as a police officer to justify his cruelty. He kept the home under martial law. Any sign of emotion from Danny was met with ridicule or a fist. If Danny cried, he was beaten. If he laughed too loudly, he was punished. When Danny brought home drawings from school, James ripped them up, calling them girlish garbage. Danny's mother tried to protect him at times, but she was fragile, both emotionally and physically. James broke her spirit early on. She attempted suicide multiple times, and each time, the emotional toll weighed heavier on young Danny. He watched his mother disappear into herself, becoming a ghost in the home, too afraid to run, too weak to fight. Danny learned early that love came with pain, and trust was always betrayed. At just 7 years old, Danny was whipped with a razor strop for losing a shoe. At age 10, he was beaten unconscious for spilling milk. At 12, he witnessed his father shoot his beloved dog in front of him because he felt the boy was getting too attached. Danny withdrew. He stopped speaking much. He spent hours alone, sketching fantasy worlds or playing guitar softly in his room. Music, especially church hymns, became his only escape. He sang in the choir, and for brief moments, he found peace in melodies that spoke of forgiveness and salvation. But home was always waiting. The abuse didn't just shape him, it twisted him. By the time he reached his late teens, Danny had no real concept of identity. He drifted through life without direction, like a ghost haunting his own body. He struggled in school, couldn't hold a job, and found it nearly impossible to connect with people. He married briefly, hoping for a fresh start, but the rage that had been programmed into him from childhood came pouring out. He beat his wife, threatened her, screamed at her with the same venom he'd once absorbed. The marriage collapsed. Danny joined the Air Force, perhaps hoping that structure would give him meaning. It didn't. He was discharged after being caught using drugs. Once again, he was drifting, job to job, town to town. With every disappointment, the darkness grew. He began committing petty crimes, breaking into stores, stealing, lying, and running. He was arrested multiple times, and each time he was released, he was just a little more bitter, a little more violent, a little more ready. The need to dominate, to control, to lash out at a world that had hurt him never left. And soon, That need became hunger. Then came Shreveport, November 4th, 1989. Danny Rolling slipped into the Grissom family home in Shreveport, Louisiana. It was a quiet, middle-class neighborhood. Inside were 55-year-old William Tom Grissom, his 24-year-old daughter Julie, and 8-year-old grandson Sean. Danny entered silently, like a wraith. What happened next was methodical, cold, controlled. Danny stabbed Tom Grissom first, then Sean, then Julie. Each attack was swift, brutal, and calculated. But Julie's death was different. After killing her, Danny cleaned her body. He washed her, arranged her limbs, posed her. It was ritualistic, reverent almost, like he was preparing her for something. And then he vanished. For 10 months, the murders haunted the town. Police were baffled. No fingerprints, no motive. No one suspected the drifter who'd passed through. Until Gainesville. August 1990, Danny arrived in Florida with a backpack, a screwdriver, a K-bar knife, and a head full of violence. He pitched a tent in the dense woods near the University of Florida and waited. Students were returning for the fall semester, unaware that the man watching them from the tree line had already killed, and would again. August 24th, 1990, Sonia Larson and Christina Powell had just moved into their apartment. They were new, nervous, and full of hope. Their future was unwritten. That night, Danny broke in. He used a screwdriver to pry open the door. The apartment was dark. He moved up the stairs silently and found Sonia asleep. She never woke up. He plunged the knife into her body with ruthless precision. Then he turned to Christina. He taped her mouth shut, then stabbed her repeatedly. When he was done, he posed their bodies. Legs spread, arms raised. He left them like dolls, grotesque, silent screams frozen in place. August 25th, Krista Hoyt lived alone. She was a records clerk for the sheriff's office. That night, Danny broke in while she was out and waited in the dark. When she returned, he attacked. She fought back, but he was too strong. He ripped her, stabbed her in the back, then calmly decapitated her. What came next was unspeakable. He positioned her body sitting upright on her bed. Then he placed her severed head on a shelf facing the corpse, so the dead woman appeared to be staring at herself. It was a scene from a nightmare, one that didn't just send shockwaves through Gainesville, but burned itself into the memories of law enforcement forever. People panicked, students fled. Apartment complexes added deadbolts and floodlights. Fear was everywhere, but Danny wasn't done. August 27th, Tracy Pauls and Manny Taboada were next. Manny was tall, strong, a former high school football player. He fought like hell. Their apartment became a battleground. Blood smeared across the walls and floors. Furniture overturned. Manny suffered multiple stab wounds before collapsing. Tracy tried to escape. She locked herself in her room, but Danny broke through. He raped, then stabbed her repeatedly. As with the others, he posed her body afterward. 5 students, 5 days. The city lost its mind. Media coverage exploded. Police were desperate. The public needed a face, a villain. Meanwhile, Danny Rolling was 100 miles away in Ocala, arrested for robbing a supermarket. No one knew they had the killer. Months later, DNA from the Gainesville crime scenes came back. It matched Rolling. In prison, Danny confessed to a cellmate, describing the murders in disturbing detail. Police searched his campsite and found his twisted trophies, audio tapes, handwritten confessions, blood-stained clothing, and drawings of his crimes. He left behind a trail of madness captured on cassette. In court, he pleaded guilty. No theatrics, no defense, just a quiet, eerie calm. He claimed the murders were committed by an alternate personality named Gemini. Said he was possessed, blamed demons. No one believed him. Danny Rolling was sentenced to death. October 25th, 2006. He ate lobster tail, butterfly, shrimp, baked potato, strawberry cheesecake, and sweet tea. He sang a gospel hymn as the lethal injection began. He didn't apologize, didn't look at the families, just slipped into silence. But Gainesville never forgot. It began with a knock. Not the kind of frantic pounding that makes your pulse spike. Not the kind that screams danger. This was a normal knock. 3 short taps, almost polite. The woman inside didn't know it, but that sound was the opening note to the last song she would ever hear. She thought it was an ordinary meeting, a potential buyer, a friendly stranger. She welcomed him in because why wouldn't she? It was daylight. She was in control. But the moment the door shut, the air shifted. Not in any way you could see. The light was still there, the furniture still in its place. But something invisible slid in between them. His hands were empty, but the presence he carried was heavier than any weapon. Later, detectives would say she never had a chance, and she wasn't the first, or the second, or the third. By the time the world learned his name, Paul Frederick Runga, it was already too late for at least 6 women and 1 little girl. The newspapers printed his mugshot. A pale, average-looking man with thinning hair and eyes that gave nothing away. But the people who worked his case said the most terrifying thing about Paul Runga wasn't what you saw in his photo. It was how, in person, he could sit across from you and speak so gently, as if he were incapable of raising his voice, all while keeping something monstrous neatly folded inside, like a switchblade hidden in a pocket. Paul was born on January 28, 1970, in Oak Forest, Illinois, a suburb on Chicago's southern edge. On the surface, his early life looked painfully ordinary. A working-class family, a small home, school days blending into each other, but people close to him would later remember flickers of something off, a strange satisfaction when he won, even in trivial games, a streak of cruelty toward animals that he brushed off as just playing. When Paul was 17, his mother died suddenly. That single event cracked something in him that may have already been fragile. If there had been a line between the darker impulses in his mind and the rest of the world, her death erased it. That same year, Paul kidnapped a 14-year-old girl. He sexually assaulted her, he beat her, and then, in a move that baffled police, he turned himself in. Psychologists would later point to that as a rare moment where guilt briefly outweighed compulsion. But prison didn't cure him. It refined him. It taught him patience. It taught him how to hide. He served just over 7 years of a 14-year sentence before walking free in 1994. On paper, he was the model of rehabilitation. He got married, held a job, smiled for neighbors. But beneath the mask, the urges had not only survived prison, they had grown teeth. January 1995. His wife was friends with a woman named Stacy Frobel. Stacy was 25, bright, trusting, the kind of person who leaned in when you spoke. One night, she came by the Runga home. The visit should have been simple. Maybe coffee, maybe talk. Instead, Paul picked up a dumbbell. The sound of metal meeting bone is not like in the movies. It's heavier, wetter. Stacy fell. The life in her eyes didn't fade so much as vanish. He carried her to the bathroom, turned on the water, and began the process of dismemberment. The bathroom tiles echoed with the sound of water running, the scrape of metal, the dull thuds of something soft and terrible. He put her in trash bags and scattered the pieces across Illinois and Wisconsin. For days afterward, he called in sick to work, and then he quit entirely, as if the act had drained him of any need for normal life. 6 months later, he found his next victims, Janeta and Amela Pashambegovic, sisters who had fled the war in Bosnia and were trying to start over in Chicago. They were 22 and 20. Paul approached them with a job offer, cleaning houses. They said yes. Why wouldn't they? In their minds, they had survived the worst the world could throw at them. They didn't know that in America, in broad daylight, death could still walk through the front door. Once inside his apartment, the door clicked shut. The sisters were handcuffed. What followed was hours of torture, strangulation, and when it was over, he dismembered them, placed their remains in garbage bags, and set them out with the trash. That was part of the horror. When the bags were lifted by sanitation workers, they blended with thousands of others hauled away each day, anonymous in death to the man who had slaughtered them. Paul had now perfected his hunting method. Classified ads, people selling homes, furniture, sports equipment, anyone inviting a stranger in was a potential target. In early 1997, 29-year-old Dorota Jubak met him in her Northwest Side home. Whatever brought him there ended in murder. He set the scene on fire afterward, the flames swallowing the evidence, the smoke curling out into the winter air like a signal no one recognized in time. Not long after, he spotted a home-for-sale ad placed by 45-year-old Yolanda Gutierrez. She answered the door with her 10-year-old daughter, Jessica. Inside, Paul bound them both. For hours, he sexually assaulted and tortured them. Then he slit their throats. He poured accelerant and lit the home. The heat erased much, but not everything. In the ashes, investigators found DNA that would eventually lead to him. His last known victim, Kazimiera Paruch, was showing her condominium when Paul arrived. She let him in expecting polite small talk about square footage and price. Instead, she was beaten, stabbed, partially undressed, doused in accelerant, and burned. By now, detectives were starting to see the pattern. Women alone at home, stranger at the door, fire at the scene. But the man behind it all stayed invisible. It wasn't until 1997, when a routine parole check turned up weapons in Paul's apartment, that the break came. With him in custody, investigators pressed hard. They had DNA from the Gutierrez Muniz murders, and it matched. When confronted, Paul didn't protest. "You got me," he said. And then he began to talk. He spoke about Stacy, about the Pashambegovic sisters, about Dorota, about Kazimiera, about Yolanda and Jessica. His words were blunt, almost mechanical, the details too vivid to be fabricated. The trial for Yolanda and Jessica's murders was like watching a slow nightmare. Jurors heard about the hours of torture, saw photographs of the blackened walls, the charred remains. In 2006, the verdict came. Guilty, eligible for the death penalty. The sentence was death. But in 2011, Illinois abolished capital punishment. Paul's sentence was commuted to life without parole. Prosecutors dropped the remaining charges, not because they doubted his guilt, but because it no longer mattered. Today, Paul Runga sits in prison. His name rarely appears in headlines now. Runga's killings left a scar on the communities he terrorized. But the next killer? He didn't feel guilt. He kept his victims close, so close they were rotting just feet from where his family slept. In 1998, a woman walked barefoot and bleeding into a gas station in Poughkeepsie, New York. Her hair was matted, her clothes torn, and her face was swollen with bruises. She said she'd just escaped from a man's house, a man who had tried to kill her. She pointed to a modest 2-story home just a few blocks away. When police went to investigate, they expected to find maybe some drugs or signs of a struggle. What they found instead was a nightmare so vile, so disturbing that several officers ran outside and vomited on the front lawn. But what no one could explain, what made the horror so much worse, was that the killer had been living in that house with his parents and his sister for years, and none of them ever suspected a thing, or at least that's what they claimed. To understand how this was even possible, you have to go back to a little boy growing up in a regular neighborhood with a not-so-regular darkness already forming inside him. Kendall Francois was born in the summer of 1971 in Poughkeepsie. He was the second of 4 children in a deeply religious Haitian-American household. His parents were strict but stable. His mother a nurse, his father a maintenance worker. From the outside, they were just another working-class family, but Kendall was different. From early on, there were warning signs. He was huge. By middle school, he was towering over his classmates. By high school, he was over 6 feet tall and weighed nearly 300 pounds. He barely spoke, and when he did, his voice was low, flat, almost emotionless. Other kids started calling him Stinky. He had chronic hygiene problems. He smelled so bad that kids avoided sitting next to him in class. Teachers complained, parents complained, but nothing changed. He played football and wrestled in high school, but he didn't have any real friends. He was a ghost walking the hallways. He graduated, joined the army briefly, but was discharged early because of medical issues. By his early 20s, he was back in his childhood home. He didn't have a girlfriend, no prospects, and no real future. He got a job as a hall monitor and janitor at a local middle school, an enormous man lumbering silently through school hallways. But by night, he was doing something else entirely. He had started soliciting sex workers downtown. Over time, he grew angrier, more aggressive. He'd lose his temper, he'd lash out, and some women said he tried to choke them during sex. Others said he held them down so hard they couldn't breathe. But no one pressed charges, so no one made him stop, until 1996, when he killed for the first time. Her name was Wendy Myers. She was 30 years old and had met Kendall before. Twice, he'd given her money, and she had run off. The third time, she agreed to go back to his house. She walked through the front door of 99 Fulton Avenue. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that once you stepped inside that house, you didn't leave. He strangled her. Not quickly, slowly, with both hands. She gasped and clawed at him, fought back. But he was just too big. She passed out and he dragged her into the bathroom, ran water into the tub and drowned her. Then he wrapped her body in black garbage bags, carried her upstairs to the attic and left her there. She would stay there for almost 2 years. He didn't stop. Next was Gina Barone. She was 29 years old, with short brown hair and a sharp tongue. Kendall had seen her before. She walked with purpose, even when she was strung out. That day she was working the streets as usual, and he offered her a ride. She agreed. She thought she'd seen his kind before. Big guy, quiet, seemed slow, easy money. But Gina made a mistake. At some point during their encounter, she said something. No one knows exactly what it was, but Kendall later said she mocked his size, laughed at him, and told him he was taking too long. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten her. He simply reached out and wrapped his massive hands around her neck. She fought back, clawed at him and tried to scream, but it was no use. He outweighed her by more than 200 pounds. Her bones cracked under the pressure of his fingers. He felt her body jerk and twitch, then go still. He wrapped her in plastic, just like Wendy Myers before her, and carried her upstairs to the attic. He laid her right next to Wendy, as if adding to some grotesque museum collection. Bag by bag, the attic was turning into a mausoleum. And that's when things changed. Kendall began to shift. Killing wasn't just an accident anymore. It wasn't a moment of rage or impulse. It was a routine, a process, a ritual. He had become methodical. He knew exactly what kind of woman to look for. Small, struggling, desperate. Women who walked the streets because they had no other options. Women society looked away from, and women no one would come looking for. Catherine Marsh was next. She was 31, pregnant, and she had been trying to get clean for her baby, trying to rebuild her life. But addiction has long claws. Kendall offered her a ride and she accepted. She never made it home. He strangled her like the others. Her body was limp and swollen from pregnancy when he wrapped it. He showed no hesitation, no remorse. He sealed her in black plastic and placed her in the attic alongside Gina and Wendy. Then came Kathleen Hurley, then Mary Giacconi. The details are nearly identical. Each woman met him in town, climbed into his car or followed him home, and vanished. All of them died in silence. The attic was dark, hot, and filled with trash. Black garbage bags lined the floorboards. Some were torn, some leaked. The smell was unimaginable, thick and choking. But Kendall lived with it, slept under it, ate dinner in the same house. While his parents and sister walked around downstairs, the air above them was literally rotting. By the summer of 1997, the attic was full. There wasn't much room left between the bodies. Decomposition had advanced. Maggots crawled through the insulation. Fluids had soaked into the wood. Even Kendall couldn't ignore the stench anymore. But instead of stopping, he simply changed locations. That's when Sandra Jean French disappeared. She was 51, older than the others, but still engaged in sex work to survive. She met Kendall downtown. He drove her home, just like the others. Inside, the familiar process unfolded. Strangulation, plastic, disposal. But Sandra didn't go to the attic. She went in the crawl space, beneath the floorboards, in the bowels of the house. He wrapped her carefully, slid her body in deep, and sealed it off. He thought the cooler temperature would slow the decay. It didn't. The smell returned. Stronger this time. It seeped through the walls and vents, curling into every room. Neighbors noticed. People walking past the house winced. His own family complained. They said it smelled like sewage or dead animals. Kendall told them raccoons had died in the walls, that he couldn't find the source. They accepted that, and the house remained sealed in silence. Then came Audrey Pugliese. Audrey was 34, and she fought. She panicked halfway through the encounter, tried to escape, screamed, hit him. That was a mistake. He snapped, grabbed her by the hair, slammed her face into the wall, stomped her when she fell. He crushed her ribs, broke her nose, silenced her forever. Her body joined Sandra's under the floor. Then, in August of 1998, came Katina Newmaster. She was only 25, and unlike the others, she had already been flagged as a potential target. She had worked as a police informant, and officers had specifically warned her, stay away from Kendall Francois. But Kendall was patient. When she was desperate enough, she got in his car. He took her home, same house, same method. But this time he killed her in the garage. He told investigators later that she fought hard, clawed at his face, left scratches. It didn't matter. He was too strong. When it was over, he dragged her lifeless body into the crawl space and tucked her next to the others. At this point, at least 8 women were missing, each one vanishing within the same area, within the same demographic. Then he made one mistake. Christine Sala. He picked her up the same way, took her home, tried to force her into sex. But she fought harder than anyone before. He choked her, slammed her into the wall, tried to drag her into his room. She managed to slip away, bolted out the front door, barefoot and screaming, until she reached a gas station. She told police what had happened, and this time they listened. Officers picked up Kendall later that day, calm as ever, cooperative. But then he said something no one expected. He asked to speak to a lawyer, and then he confessed. Not just to Christine's attack, but to everything. He told them he'd killed 8 women, told them their names, told them where the bodies were. The police got a warrant and went to 99 Fulton Avenue. They opened the attic, and what they found made grown men cry. Black garbage bags, stacked and packed, some leaking, some bulging. Maggots crawling across the insulation. Human bones tangled in plastic, skulls resting on pink insulation. A child's kiddie pool filled with decomposed remains. In the crawl space, more bodies, femurs, rib cages, hair still attached to skulls. The house wasn't just dirty, it was a tomb, and his entire family had been living there. His sister's room was directly beneath the attic. His mother's room shared a wall with the crawl space. The entire house reeked of death, but they insisted they didn't know. Kendall didn't deny anything. He pled guilty to 8 counts of murder. In court, he showed no emotion, no tears, no apology. When the victim's family stood up and screamed at him, he smirked. One mother begged him to look at her. He refused. He was sentenced to 8 consecutive life terms without parole. He never showed remorse. In 2014, after 14 years behind bars, he died of complications from AIDS. Alone, in a prison hospital. He was 43. The house where it all happened has been torn down. A new one stands in its place. It looks ordinary, clean, bright siding, trimmed lawn. But underneath, the ground remembers. It was November 3rd, 1998, at the Humboldt County Sheriff's Department in Northern California. A quiet, scruffy-looking man in his 30s walked into the lobby holding a Ziploc bag. He walked to the front desk, placed the bag carefully on the counter, and said calmly, "I'm a serial killer." Inside the bag was a woman's severed breast. The room fell silent. Investigators would later describe that moment as surreal, like time stopped. The man didn't appear angry or out of control. He seemed tired, hollow, done. His name was Wayne Adam Ford. Wayne was born December 3rd, 1961, in Petaluma, California. His father, Calvin, was American. His mother, Bridget, was a German immigrant. Their marriage was cold and unstable. When Wayne was just 10, his parents divorced. His mother disappeared shortly after, traveling to Europe. That left Wayne and his brother Rod with their strict, emotionally distant father. Wayne began to withdraw. Teachers described him as anxious, slow to trust and angry, though never violent. At 19, Wayne got into a serious drunk driving accident. He was thrown from the vehicle and went into a coma for 9 days. When he woke up, people close to him said it was like he'd become someone else, more paranoid, more impulsive, less human. He dropped out of school and enlisted in the US Marine Corps. For a time, the structure seemed to help, but behind the scenes, he was unraveling. While stationed in Germany, Wayne married a local woman, and the marriage fell apart within 2 years. He grew increasingly volatile, getting into fights, drinking heavily, threatening suicide. In 1985, he was honorably discharged from the Marines. Over the next few years, he was arrested for minor crimes, including animal cruelty, and detained at psychiatric hospitals. He was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. One psychiatrist warned he had the capacity for explosive violence. He married again in California and had a son, Max. But that marriage didn't last either. In 1997, following another bitter divorce and losing custody of Max, Wayne's life spiraled into darkness. He began working as a long-haul trucker, transporting lumber up and down the West Coast. His routes took him through Nevada, Oregon, Arizona, and deep into California's desolate highways, places where people disappeared. He started frequenting prostitutes. He picked them up near truck stops and city outskirts using his rig as a mobile trap. No one knew what was happening inside. In October 1997, a dismembered female torso washed up on the banks of Ryan Slough, north of Eureka, California. Over the next few months, more body parts, legs, arms, washed up on Clam Beach. Police couldn't identify the victim. They had no leads. Wayne would later admit that he had dismembered her in his trailer, kept body parts in his freezer, and buried others near a tree behind his campsite. Her name was Kerry Ann Cummings. She had disappeared from Eugene, Oregon. She wouldn't be identified until 2023. Wayne didn't stop. On May 16, 1998, the neon lights of Las Vegas cast a flickering glow over Tropicana Avenue, where 26-year-old Tina Renee Gibbs stood on the corner, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, not just because of the night air, but because she felt exposed and vulnerable. The city was unforgiving to women like her, women who didn't have a support system, who had fallen through the cracks. Tina wasn't a hardened criminal or a career sex worker. She was desperate. She'd come to Vegas looking for a new start, but ended up stuck, broke, and too ashamed to ask for help. She had a plan to get home, a bus ticket back to Anderson, Indiana, and she was just a few $100s short. She had turned down 3 rides already that night, creeps, men with dead eyes and dirty fingernails. Then Wayne pulled up in his truck. His rig was clean. He looked quiet, polite, even respectful. A former Marine, he knew how to keep his tone disarming, how to make someone feel safe. When he asked if she needed a lift, he didn't leer. He smiled gently. She hesitated, but something about him seemed normal. She climbed into the cab, and no one ever saw her alive again. Weeks later, in the baking heat of a remote area outside Buttonwillow, California, a hiker found a woman's decomposing body near a dry creek bed. There was no ID, no purse, no clothing. Just a body, badly deteriorated, the evidence half erased by the unforgiving sun. Dental records eventually confirmed what investigators feared. It was Tina. There were signs of strangulation, but most evidence was gone. Police had nothing to go on. She was just another nameless victim in a vast desert of forgotten women. Then it happened again. 4 months later, on the night of September 25th, 1998, 25-year-old Lynette Dayan White was seen walking alone in Ontario, California. She had left a volatile relationship and was trying to get to Sacramento, where her sister lived. She didn't have a car, barely had a phone, and trusted her instincts a little too much. That night she stood near a gas station with a small duffel bag and a hopeful smile that belied her situation. Wayne pulled up around 10:30 p.m. His truck rumbled low as he rolled down the window and offered her a ride north. She asked where he was headed. He said he had a drop in Stockton. Close enough, she thought. She got in. Hours later, her lifeless body was dumped like garbage near the outskirts of Lodi. It was clear she had been strangled. There were ligature marks, bruising, signs of a struggle, but no witnesses, no leads. Just another woman snuffed out and discarded beside a stretch of highway no one patrolled. Police opened the file and moved on. They didn't know that the killer had already chosen his next victim. Less than a month later, on October 22nd, 1998, Wayne was cruising along a desolate road near Victorville, California. He had just finished a lumber haul and his trailer was empty. He wasn't looking for work. He was hunting. 29-year-old Patricia Ann Tamers was hitchhiking along Route 66. She'd been staying in a women's shelter a few towns over, and she'd been trying to get back to family in Los Angeles. She was exhausted, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and when she saw the truck slowing beside her, she didn't hesitate. She just wanted to rest. Wayne leaned out the window, offered her a soda and a ride. His voice was soft, his eyes steady. She got in. Somewhere in the long stretch between Victorville and Hesperia, he attacked her. Wayne would later confess that something came over him. That same switch, he said, flipped every time. He said he didn't feel rage. He didn't shout. He just acted like it was mechanical. He strangled Patricia inside the cab, her cries muffled by the roar of the engine and the isolation of the desert highway. Once she was dead, he pulled off near the California aqueduct and did something even more chilling. He mutilated her body and he removed her right breast and kept it in a Ziploc bag. A trophy, evidence, or maybe just something to remind himself it was real. The next day, her body was found floating face down in the canal. Police said the scene was beyond disturbing. The water had already started to bloat and disfigure her features, but the violence inflicted on her was unmistakable. The breast was gone, and whoever had done it had taken their time. Over the next week, Wayne began drinking heavily. He started having nightmares, seeing the women's faces. He told himself he could stop, but the urge wasn't fading. It was getting worse. He was scared, not of the police, but of himself. He called his brother Rod. He was drunk, rambling. He said, "I've hurt people, Rod. I've done really bad things." Rod didn't believe him at first, but Wayne insisted. He said he couldn't live with it anymore. He was afraid the next victim wouldn't be a stranger. He thought it might be his son. Rod drove hundreds of miles to meet him. The two talked all night. And then, that next morning, they walked into the sheriff's office together. Wayne had the Ziploc bag in his coat pocket. He laid it on the counter and said, "This is all I have left of her." The interview tapes were later described as some of the most disturbing in California history. Wayne sat for hours calmly describing how he killed each woman, how he selected them, and how he felt when he did it. He told them about Kerry, about Tina, about Lynette and Patricia. He drew maps to help recover the bodies. He described the dismemberment in detail. Forensic teams recovered multiple items from his trailer and storage units. Blood-soaked rags, knives, duct tape, and more Ziploc bags. They found human tissue, hairs, bone fragments. In his journal he wrote, "I feel like two people. One of them is a monster. The other is begging for help." The press exploded. Headlines called him the confessing killer. People couldn't understand why a serial killer would turn himself in, but Wayne insisted he wasn't turning himself in to avoid punishment. He said he did it because it was the only way to stop. He was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, multiple victims, torture, and sexual assault. The defense tried to argue mental illness. They pointed to the head trauma, the psychiatric history, the blackouts, but Wayne refused an insanity plea. He told the court, "I knew what I was doing, that's why I came forward." The jury convicted him in 2006. He was sentenced to death and sent to San Quentin, where he remains on death row. In the summer of 1990, a woman walked into a bar in Bellevue, Washington, looking for a drink and maybe a little conversation. She was pretty, in her late 20s, and the bar was bustling, alive with laughter and the clinking of glasses. She didn't know it yet, but someone was watching her. Not just watching, studying. From the shadows near the jukebox, a man with a perfect smile leaned back, nursing a drink he hadn't paid for. He'd memorized her every movement. How she laughed, how she twirled her hair, how she looked over her shoulder when she thought no one was paying attention. He waited until just the right moment. When her friends went to the restroom, he slid into the seat beside her like they'd known each other forever. He was charming, funny, confident. She smiled. He smiled back. That would be the last smile she'd ever give to a stranger. Over the course of 3 months in 1990, 3 women from the Seattle suburbs vanished, each later discovered brutally murdered. Their bodies left in scenes so bizarre, so warped, so deliberately vile. They felt like something ripped from the fevered dream of a broken mind. What tied these women together wasn't just the violence of their deaths, it was the killer's eerie signature. Posed bodies, sexual humiliation, and a sick desire to send a message, though no one knew exactly to whom. And the man responsible, no one suspected him. He wasn't hiding in alleyways. He wasn't a shadowy drifter or a faceless threat. He was George Waterfield Russell Jr., a clean-cut, smooth-talking, sharply dressed black man in his early 30s who blended in anywhere and everywhere. To many, he was just the charmer. But beneath that polished exterior was a darkness so vile, so calculating, that even years after his arrest, investigators still struggle to piece together what exactly drove him to kill the way he did. To understand how George Russell Jr. became a monster hiding in plain sight, you have to go back, not just to the scene of the murders, but all the way to his childhood, where the first cracks began to form. George Russell was born in April of 1958 in Florida, the son of a police officer and a homemaker. His early life was, by most accounts, ordinary on the surface, but the surface was thin. His parents divorced when he was still young, and George was sent to live with his mother in the Pacific Northwest. The move was meant to give him a fresh start, a new environment, a chance to reset. Instead, it planted the seeds of resentment, loneliness, and something darker. As a teenager, George was charismatic. He had an easy smile, quick wit, and the uncanny ability to tell people exactly what they wanted to hear. Teachers thought he was bright, friends thought he was cool, girls thought he was harmless. But behind the charm, George was manipulative. He stole from friends. He lied constantly. He was kicked out of multiple homes. Wherever he went, there were rumors, creepy behavior, boundary pushing, control issues. But nothing ever stuck. He was too good at talking his way out of trouble. By the time George Russell reached his 20s, he had become a quiet fixture in Bellevue's nightlife scene. He wasn't loud, didn't draw attention to himself, but somehow he was always there, lurking in the background of bars, clubs, and diners, watching people loosen up under dim lights and cheap drinks. He wasn't there to socialize. He wasn't there to have fun. He was there to blend in, to observe, and most of all, to find the next door he could slip through. George had no job, no car, no steady home. What he did have was an unsettling ability to read people, especially women, and tell them exactly what they needed to hear. He'd listen just long enough to echo their own words back to them, weaving himself into their lives like he belonged there. He often introduced himself as a police officer, claiming he was following in his father's footsteps. That detail alone made women drop their guard. It made him seem stable, safe, someone with structure, purpose, and authority. And for a while, that illusion worked. He was offered spare bedrooms, temporary places to stay, sometimes even more than that. To most, he seemed like a decent guy who just needed a break. But underneath the charm was a man with no intention of standing on his own. George didn't move through life. He leached off it, hopping from one generous woman to the next, always taking more than he gave. When the lies started unraveling, when someone asked too many questions or expected too much accountability, he'd disappear, usually before they realized how much damage he'd left behind. There was no shortage of women who'd later describe him as sweet at first, or really convincing, or someone who seemed like he had a lot going on. But none of them knew the full truth, because George never stayed long enough for that. He left when things got difficult, but he never left empty-handed. Emotionally, financially, sometimes even physically, he took pieces of people with him. And somewhere along the way, just taking wasn't enough anymore. George's view of the world had soured. He believed people owed him more than they gave, especially women. When they welcomed him in, it felt right, like they were doing what they were supposed to. But when they pushed him out, challenged him, or saw through his act, it triggered something else entirely, a slow, creeping hatred. Not the kind that exploded in sudden outbursts, but the kind that simmered, plotting its next move in silence. He stopped seeing women as people. They became obstacles or tools. They were either there to serve a need, or they were in the way. And as his frustrations grew, so did the violence in his fantasies. He no longer just wanted to be let in. He wanted to stay, to dominate, to punish. And when someone refused to give him the power he felt entitled to, he began to wonder what it would feel like to take it anyway. And he would, not with rage, not with noise, but with silence, calculation, and a plan. The first body was discovered on June 23, 1990. Her name was Mary Ann Paulreich. She was 27 years old. Just the night before, she'd gone out with friends for drinks. Nothing unusual. She laughed, danced, said her goodbyes, and stepped out into the warm Bellevue night. She never made it home. The next morning, her body was found behind a restaurant, not dumped, not hidden, but arranged, posed. Her arms were folded neatly across her chest, like she was lying in a coffin. A plastic lid, something cheap, disposable, from a takeout cup, had been placed over her eyes, like a crude blindfold. There were no signs of a struggle around her, no blood, no panic, just a body perfectly still, deliberately positioned. And what the scene lacked in chaos, the autopsy more than made up for. Mary Ann had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Investigators were disturbed by the precision, the ritualistic staging. This wasn't just a murder. This was something else, something colder. A message, they thought, but they couldn't quite figure out who it was meant for. Then, just over a month later, another woman was found, August 9th. Carol Baith, 35 years old, a confident, independent woman with a strong personality and a full life. Her friends described her as careful. She didn't let people into her home easily, but somehow, someone got in. Carol was found in her own apartment, and just like Mary Ann, she had been sexually assaulted and murdered. But this time, the killer had escalated. The staging was no longer just eerie, it was shocking. Carol's body was laid out with her legs spread. Between them, propped upright, was a shotgun. Her head was wrapped tightly in plastic. There were no signs of forced entry, no robbery, nothing missing, no motive, except power. It wasn't just murder, it was humiliation, a theater of control. Every detail had been planned, the weapon, the plastic, the pose. It all screamed dominance, as if the killer wanted to reduce her to nothing more than a symbol or a prop in his fantasy. And then came the third, August 31st. Just a few weeks later, this time the victim was Andrea Randy Levine. 24 years old, a student, a waitress. Bright, kind, full of potential. Her friends adored her, and her family loved her. She had plans and a future. But none of that mattered to the man who took her life. Randy was found in her bed, and what had been done to her was worse than anything the investigators had seen so far. She had been bludgeoned, her skull fractured from multiple blows. She'd been strangled, and then after death, her body had been manipulated and violated. A sex toy had been forced down her throat so far, it may have caused her to suffocate if the blunt force hadn't killed her first. And in her hands, placed carefully, deliberately, was a book, The Joy of Sex. A title that turned the entire scene into some kind of sick joke, as if the killer thought it was funny, like the punchline to a twisted, personal performance. 3 women, 3 different ages, 3 different lives, but one pattern. They'd each been murdered and posed, like they were part of a story only one man understood. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no sign of struggle. It wasn't messy. It wasn't rushed. It was careful, planned, controlled. Bellevue and the greater Seattle area was in full-blown panic. These weren't random crimes. These were methodical executions, choreographed murders meant not only to kill, but to dehumanize. The killer wasn't hiding in the dark. He was out there watching, planning, perfecting. Police were desperate for answers. Forensics teams combed through every inch of the scenes. But then, quietly, almost by accident, he left a crack in the mask. It started with a ring. When Randy Levine was found, one of the first things her family noticed was that a piece of her jewelry was missing, a very specific ring, not valuable in the way that would tempt a thief, but deeply sentimental. Her mother had given it to her. She wore it every day, but it wasn't on her body. It wasn't anywhere in the apartment. It had been taken. Detectives flagged it as a potential clue, maybe a trophy, maybe something the killer kept. They didn't expect it to turn up, but weeks later it did. A pawn shop in the area logged the ring into their system. The shop owner hadn't thought much of it. It looked like costume jewelry. A guy had walked in, calm and confident, said he needed quick cash. He signed the receipt, handed over the ring, and left. The name on the paperwork, George Russell. When detectives brought him in for questioning, George didn't flinch. He smiled, sat calmly, acted like he had nothing to hide. He said he'd bought the ring from a man in Canada, some stranger he couldn't name. He even tried to make it sound like he was the victim, like this was all just a big misunderstanding. But the calm started to crack when they showed him what they had. Fibers pulled from Carol Bater's body matched clothing found in George's possession. His semen was found in Mary Ann Polreich's remains. His fingerprints were recovered from Randy Levine's apartment. One by one, the puzzle pieces locked into place. He changed his story, then changed it again. He said the sex had been consensual. He said he'd been invited over. He said he'd found the ring on the street. He said he couldn't remember. But by then, it didn't matter. In October 1991, George Russell was found guilty on all 3 counts of murder. The judge sentenced him to 2 life terms in prison, plus 28 years. He showed no remorse, no emotion. He just smiled, like he still thought he'd get away with it. Psychologists later evaluated him and diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder, classic signs of narcissism, manipulation, and complete lack of empathy. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't out of control. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he did it because he wanted to. To this day, George Waterfield Russell Jr. remains locked up in a Washington state prison. He's never confessed, never explained why he posed the bodies the way he did. But some believe the message was simple. It was about domination, humiliation, power, and maybe, just maybe, the illusion of being in control in a world where deep down, George Russell always felt powerless. He didn't kill for rage. He didn't kill for revenge. He killed because he could. Because behind that charming smile was a man who never saw people, only opportunities. And when the lights went down in those quiet Bellevue bars, and a woman sat alone sipping her drink, he made his move. Smooth, calculated, smiling. Then, when no one was looking, George Russell showed them who he really was. Not a charmer, not a lover, not even a man, a monster. A quiet predator whose violence was as sudden as it was brutal. Sebastian Shaw's story was just beginning, and no one was ready for what came next. When police finally caught Sebastian Shaw, they weren't sure if they had just ended the career of a man who had murdered 3 people, or the career of one of the most prolific serial killers in the Pacific Northwest. He erased his victims so completely that for a long time, police couldn't even prove he existed. Before detectives had his name, before they even knew what kind of predator they were chasing, Shaw was already building his silent trail of bodies. He started life as Chow Kwong-ho, born November 28, 1967, in South Vietnam. The Vietnam War was still raging, and violence was a daily backdrop. Death wasn't something abstract, it was everywhere. The Ho family fled the country, eventually settling in Oregon, looking for safety. But safety was never something Shaw really knew. His father, by his own later account, was violent, controlling, and dangerous. Abuse was part of the fabric of his childhood, and whatever innocence might have existed was shredded early. Other kids noticed he was different, detached, hard to read. He didn't smile much, and when he did, it rarely reached his eyes. By his teens, his behavior had taken a darker turn. He once downed a large amount of aspirin in what was officially called an overdose. Whether it was a failed suicide attempt or just another reckless act, nobody could be sure. What was clear was that this was a teenager who felt at odds with the world. At 17, Shaw left home, heading to California to live with an aunt. He wanted a new start. For a moment, it seemed like he might have one. He joined the US Marine Corps, but the discipline, the order, the structure, none of it fit. He was discharged, officially for failing to meet weight standards, though whispers suggested his attitude and conduct had been a bigger factor. He returned to Oregon, legally changing his name to Sebastian Alexander Shaw. For a time, he worked as a security dispatcher for a cable company, but in June 1991, multiple women accused him of sexual harassment. The company fired him. Within weeks, the first known victim was dead. It was July 1st, 1991. Inside a modest Portland apartment, 39-year-old Jay Rickbeal was lying in bed. Jay was a quadriplegic. A spinal cord injury years earlier had left him paralyzed from the neck down. He lived alone, relying on friends and caregivers who came in and out daily. Jay was warm, trusting. He let people into his home easily. That trust was the very thing his killer exploited. At some point that night, someone came into Jay's apartment without forcing the door. There was no yelling, no crash, no overturned furniture, just the quiet padding of footsteps and the sound of breathing in the dark. The killer approached the bed and, with one smooth, practiced movement, dragged a blade across Jay's throat. The wound was deep enough to kill instantly. When police arrived the next day, the scene was horrifying. The sheets were drenched in blood. There was no sign of robbery, no fingerprints, no defensive wounds. Whoever had done this had come and gone like a shadow. The case went cold. 1 year later, the shadow returned. It was July 20th, 1992. In a small trailer home, 18-year-old Donna Ferguson and her boyfriend, 26-year-old Todd Rudiger, were spending the night in. What happened next was never fully seen by anyone except the killer, but the evidence painted a grim picture. He likely entered while they were sleeping. Todd was attacked first. A blade slashed through his throat with such force that it severed major vessels instantly. He never had a chance to fight back. Donna was bound, sexually assaulted, and then killed in the same way. A savage, decisive cut to the neck. The wounds were deep, done with someone who knew exactly what they were doing and wasn't afraid to get close. When police arrived, they found no forced entry, no obvious signs of struggle beyond the victims themselves. The killer had once again been careful, methodical. For the next 2 years, nothing connected these murders, except in the mind of the man who committed them. In August 1994, he made a small mistake. In Redding, California, just after midnight, a patrol officer noticed a parked car with fogged windows and no one moving inside. The license plates came back stolen. Inside the driver's seat was a man sleeping. When the officer opened the door and woke him, the man was calm, polite, compliant. He was arrested without incident. When they popped the trunk, they found something that made their stomachs tighten. A ski mask, a coil of rope, handcuffs, duct tape, gloves, and knives. This wasn't camping gear. This was a kit built for control, abduction, and killing. But there was a problem. Police had no current missing person to connect to it. No body, no active crime scene. The man, Sebastian Shaw, served a short sentence for the stolen car and walked free. In Portland, detectives working the Rick Beale and Ferguson Rudiger cases took notice. Shaw's background fit, his tools fit, his capability fit, but they had no proof. By 1997, DNA forensics had advanced. Police still had biological evidence from Donna Ferguson's assault. All they needed was a sample from Shaw. They began tailing him. They watched his routines, waited for a moment when he'd discard something with his DNA on it. The break came outside a Safeway grocery store. Shaw lit a cigarette, smoked it down, and tossed the butt onto the ground. Detectives moved in immediately, collecting it before anyone else could touch it. The lab ran the sample. The result was conclusive. Shaw's DNA matched the DNA from Donna Ferguson's body. On February 20th, 1998, police surrounded Shaw. He didn't resist. He didn't panic. Even in cuffs, he seemed calm, as if this was just another event in his day. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the threat of the death penalty, Shaw pleaded guilty to the murders of Donna Ferguson and Todd Rudiger. He was given 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Detectives weren't done. They turned back to the Rick Beale case. Forensics finally tied Shaw to that murder as well. In 2000, he was convicted a 3rd time, adding another life sentence. In prison, Shaw kept to himself, but one day he told another inmate something that made even hardened convicts uneasy. He said he'd killed 10, maybe 12 people in total. When police heard this, they pressed him for details. Shaw didn't deny it. In fact, he offered to give them the names on one condition. He wanted to be moved to a federal prison where he could smoke, and he wanted a guarantee that no new charges would carry the death penalty. Police refused. Shaw went silent and never spoke about it again. Shaw spent over 2 decades at Oregon State Penitentiary. He never showed remorse. He never confessed to more than what was proven. On October 4th, 2021, guards found him dead in his cell. He was 53 years old. The cause of death has never been released. Officially, Sebastian Shaw is known to have killed 3 people. Unofficially, the number could be much higher. Only Shaw knew for certain, and he took that number with him to the grave. It was just after midnight in Seoul when the man stepped into the rain, coat zipped up to the neck, hammer in his hand, and murder on his mind. In a neighborhood where the lights of luxury apartments twinkled like stars, he approached a home that looked like it belonged in a magazine. The inside was warm, quiet, a retired couple, wealthy, accomplished, unsuspecting, was getting ready for bed. They never heard the front door open. Moments later, their world was reduced to blood and silence. And just like that, South Korea's most prolific serial killer began a spree that would leave an entire nation paralyzed with fear. His name was Yong-chul, and what he did over the next 10 months is so horrific that even seasoned detectives had trouble sleeping after hearing the details. Yu wasn't born a monster, he was born unwanted. Yong-chul was born on April 18, 1970, in the quiet countryside of Gyeongsang County, South Korea. His family was poor, painfully so. His father left early. His mother reportedly didn't want him in the first place. And by the time he was in elementary school, he was being raised by his grandmother. They lived in a crumbling house where winter wind crept in through the walls, and dinner often came in the form of rice and little else. Yu was quiet and strange. Other kids bullied him, and teachers called him lazy and slow. He didn't speak much, but he watched everything. He watched how the rich kids got praised. He watched how people who had money didn't have to worry. And he watched how his own family was dismissed, forgotten. The feeling stuck with him. He started stealing early. First it was food, then clothes, then money. By the time he was 18, he had a record: theft, burglary, and forgery. He spent most of his 20s in and out of juvenile detention and prison. But jail didn't scare him. It taught him something: how to lie better, how to manipulate, and how to hate quietly. In 1993, he got married. His wife was a masseuse, and for a while, he tried to live a normal life. They had a son, but that crumbled too. In 2000, Yu was convicted of sexually assaulting a teenager. He went back to prison, but this time for years. When he got out, he found his wife had left him. His son wouldn't speak to him, and the little stability he had was gone. In prison, he'd read about another killer, Jong Do-yong, who murdered wealthy families. It fascinated him, the way Jong snuck into rich homes and slaughtered people. Yu thought, that could be me. I could do it better. So when he walked out of prison in September 2003, he didn't go home to rebuild his life. He went hunting. The first murders were brutal and efficient. September 24, 2003, a wealthy couple in an upscale district. Yu broke in with a hammer and bludgeoned them both to death. He staged it to look like a robbery, but he didn't take much. The crime scene was confusing, but not suspicious enough to spark panic. 2 weeks later, it happened again. 3 people, another wealthy home. Again, no forced entry. Again, smashed skulls, nothing stolen. Over the next 6 weeks, he killed 6 more people in the exact same way. Wealthy, elderly, bludgeoned, often with their skulls cracked open while they were asleep in their beds. Police were clueless. The crimes didn't fit the typical robbery profile, but they also didn't look like serial murders. And Yu was careful. He wore gloves. He changed his clothes. He left through back doors or windows. And he watched the news every night to see if they suspected him. They didn't. But then something changed. In December, Yu started seeing a new woman. She was young, pretty, and worked at a massage parlor. For a brief moment, Yu believed he might start over. But when she found out about his criminal record and that he was broke, she dumped him. That rejection hurt more than he expected, and it flipped a switch. Yu decided to stop targeting the rich. Now he was going after women, and not just any women. He wanted to kill sex workers. He claimed it was to cleanse society, to punish them for moral corruption. But that was a lie. The truth was simple. He hated them because one of them had hurt him. He moved into a tiny apartment in Western Seoul and turned it into a slaughterhouse. He'd call massage services, ask for a private appointment, and wait for the woman to arrive. When she walked through the door, Yu was all charm, smiling, respectful. He'd offer her a drink, some small talk. Then, when her back was turned, he'd strike her in the head with a hammer. He killed them quickly. Then he dismembered their bodies in the bathroom using a saw and knives. He kept the water running to mask the sound. He packed the parts into bags. Sometimes, he cooked the flesh to hide the smell. Other times, he scattered the remains on remote mountain trails or construction sites. Between March and July 2004, Yu killed at least 11 women this way, probably more. The killings escalated. In June, he murdered a woman and took her jewelry to a pawn shop, using the money to buy a new outfit before going to a club. In July, he killed 2 women in less than a week. He was unstoppable, but he was also getting sloppy. Several massage parlors started to notice that their workers were disappearing after appointments to the same area. A few survivors even described a man who gave them a bad feeling. He was too quiet, too cold. On July 15, 2004, a parlor owner set a trap. He sent 2 workers to use apartment with a hidden plan to call police if things went wrong. The moment one of them entered the building and sensed danger, she ran. Police arrived minutes later and found Yu standing in the hallway, confused but calm. At the station, he stayed silent for hours. Then, out of nowhere, he asked for a cigarette. When the officer handed it to him, Yu said, "I killed 20 people. They thought he was lying," until he told them where the bodies were. He led investigators to the mountains, to streams, to parks where bones lay buried in trash bags and shallow graves. He described each murder in detail, names, dates, tools. He showed no emotion. Then he told them something that chilled even the most hardened detectives. He said he had eaten parts of some victims, livers specifically, not because he was hungry, but because he believed it gave him power. At trial, Yu smiled in court. When victims' families cried, he stared blankly. Once, when a man tried to attack him in the courtroom, Yu laughed. He admitted everything, said he had no regrets. When asked why he killed, he said, "Because I hated them." He was sentenced to death in June 2005. But in South Korea, death sentences haven't been carried out since 1997. So Yu sits in solitary confinement, his execution indefinitely delayed. He lives alone in a small cell, watched day and night. His story exploded in the media. News channels replayed his confessions on loop. Documentaries dissected his mind. A popular movie, The Chaser, was loosely based on his crimes. Even years later, his name still echoes in the national psyche. But the most disturbing part? He never looked like a monster, not until it was too late. There are photos of Yu from the early 2000s, wearing a jacket, eyes downcast, looking like a man you'd pass on the subway without a second glance. No one suspected the man next door was luring people to their deaths with nothing but a smile and a lie. He didn't stalk his victims in the shadows. He invited them in, and they never came back out. In total, he confessed to killing 26 people. Police confirmed 20, but some think the real number is higher. Today, Yong-chul remains one of the most terrifying figures in South Korea's criminal history, not just for what he did, but for how easily he did it, how calmly he confessed, how calculated his violence was. It's not the blood or the body count that haunts people. It's the thought that someone like him could be standing behind you in line, smiling, silent, planning, and you'd never even know until it's far too late. While Yong-chul horrified South Korea in the early 2000s, French-born serial killer Patrick Shaw had already shocked authorities a decade earlier with his gruesome House of Horrors killings. It was the kind of house that most people would walk past without a second glance. Half-collapsed roof, windows shattered, weeds choking the walls like veins. The floor creaked like an old throat. Inside, the air hung heavy with mildew, dust, and something else. Something that clung to your skin. And buried under that rot was a scene so grotesque that even hardened officers turned pale. On the wall, written in crude black letters, were 2 words: death room. Beneath it lay what used to be a woman, now butchered and desecrated, her body twisted in a way that seemed more like performance art than murder. They didn't know it yet, but they had just stepped into the mind of Patrick Shaw, a man with no real home, no true past, and no trace of a soul. Patrick Joseph Max Shaw was born into silence. No warm arms, no lullabies, no mother's voice. Just a number in a registry at a small French orphanage in 1966. He was left there days after his birth, with no explanation, no note, nothing. His early years were spent in institutional shadow, raised by rotating staff, crying babies, and the ever-present echo of abandonment. He didn't cry much after that. From the start, something in him was different. He didn't play. He watched as other children formed attachments. He formed habits, lying, stealing, manipulating. He'd cry when he wanted attention, laugh when others were in pain, and go utterly blank when he was punished. By 16, he was gone, aged out of the system and swallowed whole by a world that never noticed him. He bounced between odd jobs, shelters, train stations. He said he joined the French army, said he fought in Lebanon, said he killed people with his bare hands, but there were no records to prove any of it. Patrick was a phantom, and phantoms don't leave footprints. In the early 1990s, he drifted into Italy, surviving on handouts and manipulation. He had a certain charm, weathered, calm, eyes that looked through you. People gave him food, rides, trust. They always regretted it. By 1995, he was a vagrant living along the Ligurian coast. That's where he met Ingrid Obermeier, a German woman also down on her luck. She was soft-spoken, timid, worn by life. The two of them were kindred spirits in a way, broken, invisible, discarded. They wandered together, sleeping in alleyways and abandoned houses, sharing bread and silence. Patrick made her feel seen, safe. That was his gift. They found an old crumbling house in Cuneo tucked off a dirt road no one used anymore. It was dark, water damaged and stank of mold. But to them, it was shelter, a home. They stayed there for days, until one night everything changed. Patrick never explained what set him off. Maybe it was a word, a look, or maybe deep down he'd been planning it from the beginning. He waited until she was asleep. Then, quietly, he took a wrench, rusted, heavy, and brought it down on her skull. She stirred once, then stopped. He hit her again and again, until her face was no longer human. But he didn't stop there. He dragged her body across the room, stripped her bare, and began mutilating her with terrifying calm. He removed her breasts and placed them over her eyes. He cut into her torso, opening her like a butcher would. Then, using black paint he'd found earlier in the week, he wrote "Death Room" on the wall above her. Then he left. Her body wasn't discovered for weeks. A hiker smelled something, pushed through the door, and nearly vomited on sight. Police were stunned. They had no suspect, no motive, not even a fingerprint. It looked like a satanic ritual, but it was something worse. Patrick had already moved on, further north, blending in with the homeless. That's where he met Nadia Carlino, 42 years old, recently displaced, vulnerable. He played the same game: sympathy, charm, protection. She followed him, like Ingrid had. And just like before, it ended in blood. This time, he was bolder. He took Nadia to an open sandpit near an industrial site. No house, no cover. He struck her in the head, dragged her down into the dirt and snapped her spine in two. He ripped into her abdomen, left her exposed, then buried her in shallow sand. Not well, not deeply, almost as if he wanted her to be found. And she was. A cyclist noticed something strange. The wind had shifted the sand. A single breast was sticking out, sunburned, misshapen, grotesque. Police dug and found the rest. The body was rotting, dismembered, face nearly unrecognizable. Witnesses had seen Nadia with a man earlier that week, a tall, thin foreigner with sharp cheekbones and dead eyes. Within days, they had a name and a location. Patrick was found staying with a friend in Turney, pretending to be a traveling artist. When they broke down the door, he didn't resist. He was arrested, charged with Ingrid's murder. Nadia's death was harder to pin. He didn't confess, and forensic evidence was thin, but they had enough. At trial, he sat still, hands folded, barely blinking. When the prosecutor read the details aloud, the wrench, the mutilation, the breast over the eyes, he looked bored, like he'd heard it before. He was sentenced to 26 years for Ingrid's murder, 2 more for hiding Nadia's corpse. A psychiatric evaluation extended his time. One doctor said, "He's not insane, he's empty." Then came prison. In Porto Azuro, guards kept him isolated. He rarely spoke. He drew strange diagrams in his cell, symbols, faces, twisted limbs. Other inmates avoided him, but eventually he was given a cellmate. Alberico Soma, a mid-level criminal with a mouth that didn't know when to shut. It was a fatal mismatch. One morning in 2005, guards opened the door and froze. Blood coated the walls. Alberico was lying on the floor, his throat opened like a second mouth, arms stretched, eyes wide. Patrick was sitting cross-legged, hands red, smiling faintly. On the walls, painted in blood, were crosses, numbers, symbols no one could decipher. Some said they looked like ritual markings. Others thought they were just chaos. Patrick never explained. His reason? He talked too much. Another trial, another sentence, another psychiatric transfer. By now, Patrick was in his 40s, frail, diabetic, but still eerily calm. He spoke to almost no one. Then, in 2007, he did something unexpected. He wrote a letter to the prosecutor. In it, he confessed to all 3 murders. Ingrid, Nadia, Alberico. He said he didn't regret them, that each person was meant to die, that he had freed them. He called himself a tool of correction. It was the rambling of a madman, but too coherent to be dismissed. Despite the confession, he couldn't be recharged for Nadia's murder. Legally, his psychiatric sentence already covered it. Justice had limits, and Patrick knew them. For the next 15 years, he faded from public view. He lived out his time in a psychiatric institute in Vico Canaveses, isolated, silent, watching people with those same glassy eyes. He spent hours just staring, sometimes at the wall, sometimes at the floor, but often at whoever walked past his room. The drawings never stopped, pages and pages filled with distorted human forms, bodies with missing limbs, gaping mouths, women without eyes. And then, on the night of March 25th, 2022, it all ended. At 3:17 a.m., the night shift checked again. He hadn't moved. They called his name. No response. When they touched his arm, it was cold. Patrick Joseph Max Scharf died as quietly as he lived. A coroner would later say it was likely a massive stroke, possibly a heart issue. He was 56. After the legally mandated wait period, he was buried in a municipal grave at the city's expense. No funeral, no priest, no stone. Just a number on a registry and a hole in the ground. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.